here's the big idea. I think this is something a Christian ought to endorse. You don't move forward by eliminating uncertainty. You move forward by learning who to trust within it. So it's a question about how do you go forward into uncertainty, not a question about how can I get rid of uncertainty from my life. So that's the big idea, and we'll see if we can support that. But thinking about yourselves and then thinking about a lot of people, here's a sort of a shared experience that many of us have, many college students have, people who are new to the workforce, when you're at a young age and you're past high school, but you're thinking carefully about like what's the rest of my life going to look like. You've got a lot of interesting questions, and they're what we call high stakes decisions. You think about like what's your major going to be, what's your career going to be, where do you want to live? Questions about your identity in the sense of like what kind of person are you going to be? What are the values that you care about? What are you trying to find job-wise? Are you trying to find a high-paying job? Are you trying to find a job that helps a lot of people? Are you trying to find a job that's really fun? Are you trying to find a job that's at the right location? All of these kind of high-stakes decisions that you're thinking through, especially at this phase of life, you're in a sort of college environment. High-stakes decisions. You're also in an unstable environment. Now, we could talk globally. I mean, the world changes all the time. There's a great deal of things that change about the world regularly, but also in terms of being on a college campus, you're faced with new opportunities every day. You're faced with new interactions with new people. There's always possibilities. I mean, you could change your major. You could go a different direction. Like, there's all of this. College campus is supposed to be sort of like brimming with possibilities, right? In that sense. And so, one of the wonderful things about college campuses is that they have that kind of possibility about them, but also can be one of the really stressful things about a college campus. And so there's this kind of core question, I think, that many of us ask: what if I choose wrong? What if I choose the wrong major? What if I choose the wrong job? What if I choose to chase money instead of chasing my passion? What if I, like all those kinds of questions, and all these important decisions. What if I choose wrong? There's lots of ways that I could choose, and we want to sort of get it right, I guess, is the pressure that we face many times. So thinking about that, we've got this kind of contrast. Here's what we want. What we would like is we'd like clarity about the future. I'd like to know what direction the future is going, what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, all of those things. What I would like is control. I'd like to be in charge of what's going to come in the future. I'd like my decisions to matter, and I'd like to have the competence to be able to make those decisions well. And then when I make a good decision, I'd like it to turn out good, right? That kind of thing. I'd like guarantees. If I spend a lot of time thinking about my major and my job and my career, and I put a lot of time and effort into making those decisions, I want it to work out well. Like, that's what I would like. Right? So those are the things that we want. I suspect they're not so much the things that we have, though. Here's what I would say maybe we actually have. We don't have perfect clarity about the future. We've got partial knowledge at best. We know how the future might go. We know how we would like the future to go. We know maybe what steps we might take in order to help the future go the way we want it to go. But ultimately, we don't know everything. It's hard to know. I mean, when you think about a choice like, what if I've got two opportunities where I can be hired for my first job at two different companies. If I choose one or if I choose the other, like, which one's going to turn out the best for me? Probably you don't know. I mean, you can make your best guess, right? But it's partial. It's limited. Limited knowledge and certainly limited control. The best laid plans, right, can go awry when you don't want them to, and that's not because you weren't committed to them or because you didn't take them carefully, but because life just comes at us in ways that we don't expect and we don't anticipate. And we have, there's real risk here. So, eventually you're going to have to support yourself or have a job and maybe have a family and all of those kinds of things. And you're thinking about all those things, and you're thinking about maybe retirement eventually, all of that kind of stuff. And so now what I want to do right now is I want to make the right choice. And I want to sort of get it right now so so that everything in the future kind of falls into place accordingly. So we would love to have clarity, control, and guarantees, but we have just limited, partial control and real risk when we make decisions. So call that a problem. That is not a Christian problem, a non-Christian problem. That is just a human problem. That's just the way that the world goes for people. So that has nothing to do with faith or anything like that. It's just the human condition. But with this kind of pressure, and here's sort of where the real problem lies, is all of a sudden when you have this kind of pressure, like I want to make the right decisions, and so much is riding on all of these, as you think about your future, riding on all of these decisions, every decision feels like really defining. So what's my major? Or should I double major? Or should I have what minor should I do? Like any of those decisions can feel really stressful if you allow them to. And when they do, then fear starts to increase, maybe decision paralysis, anxiety, all of those kinds of things sort of come into the picture. Stress, anxiety, which can affect your health, can affect your sort of general welfare, all of those things. So that's the problem, right? That's the hurdle that we all face, especially at this juncture in time when we're thinking about the future. Okay, so here's a picture. Let me tell you, this is a picture of me years ago when I was in the military. Why do I show a picture of myself in the military? To show you kind of how, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I walked through this period of uncertainty before kind of pulling it back to a general plane. But for me, I'm in the military here primarily because I attempted to go to college twice at this point, and I had failed out of college twice by this point, which is probably not the typical path that someone who's now a college professor would take to becoming a college professor, but it's the path that I took. And it's because when I went to college, I just wasn't prepared to like do any hard work, really, or like, I didn't really want to go to class, I didn't really want to do my work, that kind of stuff, and so I failed a bunch of classes for about 3 semesters total across 2 colleges. And so I was thinking about, again, all these same things. What is my future going to look like? What are my plans? Now I'm thinking I failed out of college. Like, what can I even, how could I ever reach those plans at this point? And so for me, the landing spot ended up being the military. So I joined the military I guess I ended up being in the military for about 10 years. And so here's the sort of why this matters. For me, the military was this place where I think I matured, I think I broadened my horizons, but one thing that happened in the military I think is connected to what we're thinking about tonight, which is I got the opportunity when I was in Iraq one year, this would have been 2005, I was in Iraq, I got to visit an ancient archaeological site that's in Iraq that's called Ur, which maybe you've heard of if you haven't. An ancient city that stretches back, 5,000 years, a very, very ancient sort of Mesopotamian city. And this is what's called a ziggurat. This is the sort of most prominent feature. It's a big temple complex that was there. What's interesting about Ur, though, is this. Let me say a couple things about Ur before I pull us back in and we'll see why this makes sense here in a moment. Ur, this is like a generated image of what it might have looked like. And Ur was like the city of cities at the time, when about, say, like 2000 BC, something like that, in Mesopotamia. Probably about 30,000 people lived there, which makes it probably the largest city in the world at that point, or one of the very largest cities. They had this system of canals and an internal port inside their walls, all of these kinds of things. Very advanced city, advanced culture, and had a religious background, as almost every city would have. Every place would have back then. There wouldn't have been a lot of like atheists back at that time. But they had this huge temple complex, huge palace complex, all of that. So why do I say that? Because there's one other interesting fact about Ur is this. You can find a structure there that's called Abraham's house. What does that mean? That means, well, what it really means is there's this character in the Bible called Abraham that came from the city of Ur originally. And we'll see that here in a moment. This is surely not actually his house. This is probably 300 or 400 years after he would have lived there. But it is the place where Abraham came from. And you can see in the background that big ziggurat temple complex way back there. So why do I draw your attention to this story when we're talking about uncertainty? I was just talking about college and all that stuff. Now we're in Iraq, and we're in Ur 2,000 years before 2000 BC. Here's why. Because let me read a verse from, two verses actually, from the Bible about Abraham. So this is Abraham. He lived in Ur, so when it says going from your country, that's Ur. And the Lord says this to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. There is a whole lot we could say about Abraham. What I'm going to say about Abraham at this point is just this, that we're gonna pull on this thread. Abraham is a core story when it comes to Scripture, when it comes to sort of the backbone of the Christian Scriptures in the Bible. Abraham is one of the guys. It's like Jesus, it's Moses, it's Abraham, it's David. He's one of the big kind of characters. And this is where things start for Abraham. This is where we first meet Abraham, right? Way in the beginning of the Bible, in the book of Genesis. And what do we notice as we look at this passage? Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. Here's a couple brief observations about just those couple verses. One is this. God tells Abraham to go, right? So he gives him an active plan here. So if you're one way you might answer these questions about uncertainty if you're a Christian, you're going to think about biblical narratives like this, biblical characters like this. How did they engage with uncertainty? Here's one prime example. We have this case where Abraham knows, God communicates to him in some way that he's supposed to go. He's supposed to leave Ur, that advanced, great city, biggest city in the world, and he's supposed to go. Where is he going to go? No idea. So he's not given a destination. He's not given a timeline. He's not given an explanation for, why is it Abraham and not somebody else and all that kind of stuff. He's not given any of those explanations at all. And then one more observation. Here's what he is given. He's given a promise and he's given a relationship. And I want to suggest that when you're thinking about things through a Christian perspective, that's all you have in the face of uncertainty. But I suspect that it's enough from the Christian perspective. So again, looking back at that verse, so I'm telling you, there's no information about what's going to happen. It just says, go from your country and your kindred, like your friends, your family, your livelihood, all of those things, just leave and go. Right? So, what does that picture tell us about uncertainty, about the Christian perspective? Well, it means that Christians have some reflection to do, some meditation to do. Right? If you're expecting, because I believe in God, because I have a Bible, maybe I go to church and do all those kinds of things. If you're expecting that the result is going to be the future, it becomes very clear for you, and it's not stressful at all, and there's no anxiety or anything like that, then I think you've got the wrong picture of Christianity. I don't think Christianity offers that at all. It doesn't offer that picture. What it does offer is a relationship. We'll see how that plays out. One more verse, if you were to skip way ahead in the Bible from Genesis, where we just were, to Hebrews, which is much closer to the end of the Bible, there's this verse, and there's this like 2/3 of a chapter, Hebrews chapter 11, where they're talking about Abraham, because Abraham is one of the great fathers of their faith again. This is an important story. And what does Hebrews tell us? The first thing Hebrews says about Abraham: by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. And that's just probably the story of life for Christians, non-Christians, everybody. We've all got to go out, right? And we ultimately we don't know where we're going, where we're going to end up, all that. So that's the problem that we're looking at and we're thinking about. So to kind of think about this a little bit more, let me kind of clarify some things that Christianity does not offer. It doesn't offer you this kind of full clarity. It doesn't offer you control. All those things earlier that I said we wanted to have, guarantees. Christianity doesn't offer any of those things. So if you're looking at uncertainty about the future, and you're thinking, what I really like is clarity, control, and guaranteed outcome, Christianity is not going to give that to you. And at the same time, Christianity is going to say that's not the right answer anyway. That's not really, those things wouldn't really be the solution to the problem anyway. Something else is important for the problem. And this is what Christianity does offer. A trustworthy God. A different view of success. We'll talk a little bit about like, what would it look like for my life to go well? What would it look like for my future to be successful? We'll talk about that here in a moment. And Christianity offers you presence over prediction, meaning God's presence will be with you as you go through these sort of trials of uncertainty that you look through. There's a lot we could say about these things, but let me just point to one of the main characters of Christianity, which is Jesus. And we have this picture. This is something Jesus says here. The night that he's going to be betrayed, and then it's going to lead to his crucifixion, his death. At that time, he's asking his disciples to pray with him, and then he's praying himself. And what he says, he knows ahead of time what's about to happen. I don't know if that means he knows every detail, but he knows he's about to suffer. He knows he's about to die. He knows those things. And he prays this, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. So it demonstrates this kind of picture that Jesus is this kind of human person. Jesus is this strange human/God kind of figure, right? Which we talk about Q&A if you've got questions about that. But Jesus is about to suffer a human death, a very human death. But he says, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. So one thing that Christians will say about uncertainty is not only that the world is uncertain, but that God will, and not only that God offers you a relationship where he will stay with you through uncertainty and through these different trials, but also that God himself has experienced that uncertainty, those trials for himself as well, when Jesus entered into a human body and he suffered and died. Again, we can't go into all of the details about the gospel story, the story of Christ, but feel free to ask questions about it if you like. So Jesus has experienced great suffering, great uncertainty, great fear, and he offers his himself to you, his own experiences to you as well. So what are some of the implications for Christians? I would say this. Here's the first thing. What should a Christian be thinking about? Well, if I'm thinking through what the Bible says, and I think about characters like Abraham, like Jesus, that have that face this uncertainty. In either case, Abraham wasn't offered a complete plan. He wasn't offered a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, anything like that. He was told what the first step is, right? Which is leave and go. And it wasn't until he steps out in faith in that first step that the rest of the plan falls into place. Although, spoiler alert, Abraham never gets to take over the land that God is bringing him to. Abraham's descendants do that much later than Abraham. Abraham dies a nomad, owning almost nothing in terms of land. He owns one small parcel of land where he gets buried. That's about all that he owns. So even for him, it's like this promise is something very, very much in the future. But he steps out in faith, right? God tells him to go, and he goes. So he steps out in faith. So as Christians, we should be thinking, what's the next step I should take? Not how does everything fall into place for the next 10 years, but what's the next step that I take? And how can I do that? Here's another thing, and I promised we'd talk about this a moment ago. Focus on what is ours to control. The Bible tells us a lot of things. If you read through the whole Bible, and it would take you a while, it would tell you a lot of things about how you ought to live your life. One thing it will never tell you is that you need to have your 10-year plan figured out, written down in pen and stamped and finalized. It will never say that at all. But what it does say are things like live in right relationship with other people, put other people's needs before your own, sacrifice for others, be a peacemaker, which doesn't just mean you avoid conflict, it means you actively bring about peace in the world that you live in. It tells you, again, loving your enemies. It tells you to root out injustice, to care for the widows and the orphans and the people who can't take care of themselves in society. All of those kinds of things. Those are things that I can control. I can control that today. And if 10 years from now, I have no idea where I'll be, but I know that I can care for people when I'm there. I know that I can love my enemies when I'm there. I know that I can fight against injustice when I'm there. And so those are the things I think that Christians think we ought to focus on. And if you focus hard enough on those things, I suspect fears about the distant future will kind of fade into the background. You won't have enough mental energy for it anymore. But that's the general idea. And then kind of the big question, I guess, is this. Whose voice are you going to trust? So as you think about the future, there's a lot of voices you could trust. Maybe it's voices of professors, maybe it's voices of parents, friends, maybe it's voices of things like fear. Maybe you've got expectations that you're thinking about fighting against, and you're trying to meet those expectations, and so they guide you. Maybe it's the general culture that you live in or you come from that can guide you. Maybe it's yourself that can guide you. Or, as a Christian might do, maybe it's God that you can trust in. In any case, everybody has to answer this question of like who they're going to trust. Nobody escapes that question. It's not just Christians who are deciding to trust somebody. All of us are deciding to trust someone or something. For Christians, it's this God, the Bible, right? For others, it can be any number of things. But we've all got this question about who we're going to trust. So I don't know. As Abraham was standing there in Ur, and he was told to leave this place. I don't know, there's that huge ziggurat. He probably had his own religious views in the background. Probably had people, his father, his family, his friends, could have told him a lot of different things about what to do. Abraham chose to hear the voice of God and to listen to it and to trust it in faith and to step out. So how does he deal with uncertainty? He steps into it with a friend, which is God. That's ultimately what Christianity has to offer. And so, in my own case, I can say this too about trying to plan the future. So if I was a soldier in Iraq, or I was a student that was failing out of undergrad institution number 1 or undergraduate institution number 2, I was trying to answer all these questions. I would have loved to have my 10-year plan nailed down, right, and finalized. But I didn't, and I didn't know where to go. But I did have, in this way I think I resonate with Abraham, I did have faith in a God that would lead me and that promised to be with me wherever I end up and to offer his help along the way. And so I ended up leaving Ur, and now I'm teaching at you are, right? At the University of Rochester. So I never would have planned that path. I never would have Rochester, I don't think I ever, for a second in my life, thought about Rochester, New York. I grew up in Indiana and Michigan, like that area, and like I never had thought about Rochester in my life, but I'm here, and now it turns out it's the place where I've essentially been raising my kids, the place that they call home, and it's become our home too, and it's been good, and I can tell you that if I had been able to plan everything out myself 20 years ago, I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be experiencing the good things that I'm experiencing, because God called me to follow. And for me, that looked like the military for a little while. It looked like finishing my undergrad eventually, actually having to go to class and turning my homework, all those things that nobody wants to do, and going to grad school and all that stuff. So that's a little bit about sort of my story and my perspective, but it all, I think, it sort of points in the same direction. Jesus' story, Abraham's story, my own story, I think your story too, if you let it, which is this. You don't move forward by eliminating uncertainty. You move forward by learning who to trust within uncertainty. So that's the picture. That's the perspective in terms of Christianity, and I think it's a pretty faithful representation of what the Christian perspective should be about uncertainty. But I'm happy to talk more about it. Happy to discuss if people have questions.
Thank you.